It's a really important moment for us at the Global Citizens Assembly. It's a deliberately intimate gathering to share some of the initial findings of the Global Citizens Assembly with the press and trusted colleagues to get the initial responses. For those who don't know, the Global Citizens Assembly was prototyped at COP26, supported by the UK government. It was launched as a permanent body, Sandrine was there in New York on the fringes of the UN Summit for the Future in 2024, and with Brazilians at COP30, it started operating as a permanent body. And the conversation started happening almost 80 years to the day since the formation of the UN General Assembly. On the 17th of January of this year, the 105 citizens from 60 countries across the world started deliberating for 7 weeks, examining one of the defining challenges of our time, how to feed humanity whilst tackling climate change. Gathered here today, it's clear that food systems are in crisis. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has brought it really to the forefront of all of our minds, very obviously. We're in London, the El Niño event is not just having a massive impact on our weeks here in London, but it's potentially going to have shocks around the world, increasing core commodity prices by over 50%. And given this moment of crisis we're living through, of course, governments are struggling to respond. But we, people like us, people all around the world, we have no choice but to adapt. We have no choice but to act. We have no choice but to take action. And in the words of Anna Tony, the CEO of COP30, people have no choice but to act. The Global Citizens Assembly consisted of people from over 60 countries, selected by lottery, no vested interest, and a representative of the global population. They spent 7 weeks examining the evidence on food and climate. They heard from farmers, scientists, industry experts, indigenous groups, and activists. And they grappled with some of the hardest trade-offs in the food systems discourse. How much natural land to protect, what that means for how the world produces food, and then they voted. And the verdict was clear. And if you haven't got it in front of you, if you have a look in this document here, there are the extensive outcomes there of the technical conversations that took place in the Global Citizens Assembly. But they voted to protect the forests, to phase down industrial animal food production, transform the system that governs our food systems, and all 22 of the calls to action, which you can see here on page 3, and going into much more detail throughout the publications, they had over 85% of support. So this morning, you're going to hear the details of what they found. But perhaps the biggest story, I think the biggest story, isn't what they agreed on, it's how they agreed it. And as I already mentioned, the Assembly members have no vested interests. Lottery and representation eliminates corruption. The evidence is now clear on issues as diverse as climate and AI regulation. People make more effective policy than politicians. There's extensive 30-year evidence of that. If you look at our academic partners from around the world, you can see the basis for that. Now, you might have heard of the Irish and French citizens' assemblies that broke the political deadlock on climate and abortion. But what you might not know is that over the last decade, there's been 7,000 similar initiatives around the world, and increasing examples of permanent assemblies, such as the Ostbelgian Assembly, the Paris Assembly, and even here in East London, the Newham Permanent Assembly. This represents a movement of governance systems change, what we call the citizens' track, providing a new layer of how we can begin to reboot our governance systems in the face of the crisis. Now, in these processes, people will learn about the issues, their views change, polarization almost always evaporates. And it's not that people agree, it's not about consensus, it's about the conditions that are created for people to have deep respect between one another and new possibilities arrive. We'll hear from Anna in a moment about that. During this assembly, support for reducing industrial animal production rose by 29 percentage points across the assembly. People like Anna, who's from a livestock farming background, I myself am from a sheep and farming background, I was not, of course, in the assembly, deliberated and voting for change, not because they were told to, but because the experience they had in the assembly took them there. So in a moment, you'll hear from 2 assembly members, Nalan Yildirim to my right, and Anna Nambazi, who will be brought in online. They'll speak about what they learned from the process from the inside. Then you're going to learn from Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, who's going to talk about the implications for our global governance system. Then Sofia Castillo, sitting to my left, on what actually happened during the assembly. And finally, from Fabrice de Klerk on the science that these decisions were aligned with. Now, in this moment, it is very obvious that our multilateralist system is struggling. Is it a surprise, given the extent of our challenges, that all of our governance systems are struggling? We need new energy in our system. We need our governance systems change to be initiated and started. And we think that this movement of assemblies around the world provide a really good bet for looking at how can we reimagine how we govern the world today. And not simply because it's about providing better information for policymakers, because it recognizes that every single one of us are a critical agent for change within the crisis that we face. And that's why, in the Global Citizens Assembly, anyone can be part of it. Anyone can run a community assembly. Anyone can have a seat at the global governance table. And that's why we think this process is really worth taking seriously.